Genesis chapter 39 verse 1 to 23. Verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. Verse 3. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did. Verse 4. Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Verse 5. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the households of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessings of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. Verse 6. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with everything except the food he ate. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. Verse 7. And after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." Verse 8. But he refused. "With me in charge," he told her, "my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care." Verse 9. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked things and sin against God? Verse 10. And though she spoke to Joseph day by day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Verse 11. One day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. Verse 12. She caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hands and ran out of the house. Verse 13. When she saw that he had left his clocks in her hands and had run out of the house. Verse 14. She called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed." Verse 15. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. Verse 16. She kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Verse 17. Then she told him this story. "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me." Verse 18. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. Verse 19. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me?" He burned with anger. Verse 20. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, verse 21, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Verse 22, so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. Verse 23, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Genesis chapter 40 verse 1 to 23. Verse 1. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Verse 2. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Verse 3. And put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. Verse 4. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them, after they had been in custody for some time. Verse 5. Each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Verse 6. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. Verse 7. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both have dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belongs to God? Tell me your dreams." Verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me." Verse 10. And on the vine were 3 branches, as soon as it budded. It blossomed, and its cluster ripens into grapes. Verse 11. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand. Verse 12. This is what it means. Joseph said to him, "The 3 branches are 3 days." Verse 13. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. Verse 14. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Verse 15. I was forcibly carried off from the lands of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. Verse 16. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread." Verse 17. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Verse 18. This is what it means. Joseph said, "The 3 baskets are the 3 days." Verse 20. Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearers and the chief bakers in the presence of his officials. Verse 20. Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. Verse 21. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Verse 22. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. Verse 23. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.